The controversial lectures that Knut Hamsun gave in 1891 contained a broadside attack on the traditional novel, accusing it of applying a superficial psychology and showing a utilitarian concern with social problems. Furthermore, they derided what he called literary creation by dint of science and numbers, stressing that an author is a subjectivity whose depiction of life and people flows from his own feelings. In particular, Hamsun criticized the work of his elders for its allegedly stereotypic character portrayal, expressing a preference for the changeable and divided mind, for individuals in whom inconsistency is literally their fundamental trait. This comes from the introduction of Knut Hamsun's Pan, written by Sverre Lyngstad. Lyngstad is generally considered to be the translator of Hamsun. His words here in the introduction help us to understand Knut Hamsun's writing in general, but this novel Pan specifically. The novel Pan was written in 1894. Sometimes this is called his second breakthrough. His first came in 1890 with the novel Hunger. Knut Hamsun was a proto-modernist. He was a reader of Dostoevsky. You can see a lot of Dostoevsky's Underground Man in Hamsun's works. Knut Hamsun also proved that right-wing loons could be in touch with their creative side and could write a compelling and exciting love story. Isaac Bashevis Singer, survivor of the Holocaust, says that the story that Pan tells is as gripping as ever. He also says that all of modern literature, modernism, begins with Knut Hamsun. The story of Pan is a curious one. It's written in the first person. Thomas Glan is our narrator. He's a strange man. Sometimes he would seem to be psychopathic, other times in touch with nature. Also in the introduction, they question, is this a Rousseau of the North, being Norway, or perhaps he is just a tourist or a exile of the modern city, trying to get away, trying to clear his head in the forests. As stated in the introduction, this was quoted from Hamsun's own words, inconsistency is literally the fundamental trait, and that would certainly prove true for Glan, and that's why he's so exciting to read in this novel. We don't know what he's going to do. He often does things that goes against his interests. He is sometimes lovable, other times horrible. He's constantly caught up in love triangles. The initial one of this story begins with Glan and Edvarda. She's the antagonist of this novel. She appears to be a young girl at first, but then he finds out later that she's actually older than she appears. And this is true for many of the things in this novel, in this setting. Things appear to be one way and turned out to be another. Another love interest in the novel is Eva. Again, she appears to be the blacksmith's daughter, only to turn out to Glan finds out that she's actually the wife. Edvarda's father, Mr. Mack, is also a suitor of Eva, and based on Glan's narrative, if we can believe it or not, Mr. Mack set things up so Glan's immature prank at the end caused Eva to die. The novel opens. I've thought these last few days about the endless day of the Nordland summer. I sit here and think about it, about a hut I lived in, and about the forest behind the hut. And I take to writing things down for my own amusement, to pass the time. Time hangs heavy. I can't make it pass as quickly as I would like, though I have no regrets and lead the merriest of lives. I'm quite content with everything, and 30 is no great age. A few days ago I received a pair of bird's feathers from far away. from someone who was under no obligation to send them to me. 2 green feathers in a sheet of letter paper with a coronet on it and sealed with a wafer. It gave me real pleasure to see those 2 feathers so devilishly green. Otherwise, I have no complaints except for a touch of rheumatism in my left foot, now and then, from an old gunshot wound that has long since healed. So the opener of the novel, it's retrospective in its narration. A number of hints there. We find out later that the feathers were actually a gift that he gave to Edvarda, even though their relationship did not turn out well. Edvarda still longs for Glan, and perhaps Glan for her as well, but he won't actually admit that or express that. He says he's leading the merriest of lives, though again, like a modernist, unreliable narrator, we can't believe what he's telling us. Rheumatism in his left foot from an old gunshot wound. He actually shot himself. We have a lot of self-inflicted harm in this novel. We also have some killing of animals, a dog, a beloved dog. We find out later in the next paragraph that he does have a new dog. So, like a Garcia Marquez novel, we have all the hints of what's going to happen later as this story progresses. Again, what makes this story so enjoyable to read is really Glan. He's unpredictable. He's a madman. He's described as having animal eyes. This is actually by Edvarda. She was saying that one of her friends said this, but again, we find out later this was actually her words, but she's just saying her friend said it. You have animal eyes, she says, and when you look at her, it makes her go wild. It's as if you touched her, she says. So Glan is this mysterious Pan-like figure, living in the forest, coming into town, making a fool of himself a lot of the times, dropping glasses at parties, leaving scuff marks with his big boots on the dance floor. He's clumsy like that, and then he's also erratic. When he feels like he's being ignored, like on one of their outings, he suddenly does something very foolish, which we'll read here. We got into the boat. She took a seat beside me, on my thwart. I could feel her knee. I looked at her, and she returned my look for a moment. It did me good to have her touching me with her knee, and I was beginning to feel rewarded for that bitter day, and to regain my joyful mood again, when she suddenly changed her position, turned her back on me, and started talking to the doctor. The doctor is sort of Glan's competition here, though he doesn't get Edvarda either in the end. Talking to the doctor, who sat at the tiller. For a full quarter of an hour, I didn't exist for her. Then I did something I regret, and haven't yet forgotten. Her shoe slipped off her foot, and I grabbed it and flung it far out over the water, whether for joy at her being so near, or from some urge to assert myself and remind her of my existence. I don't know. It all happened so quickly, I didn't think. I just had that impulse. The ladies raised an outcry. I myself felt as though paralyzed by what I had done. But what was the use of that? It was done. The doctor came to my aid, crying, "Row away," and steered for the shoe, and the next moment the oarsman had caught it, just as it filled with water and was sinking below the surface. The man got his arm thoroughly wet. Then there was a chorus of hurrahs from both boats because the shoe had been saved. So, and interestingly here, Glan himself doesn't know why he did this. He speculates, maybe I did it out of joy. She's next to me, and I just kind of possessed by this joy, and I threw the shoe, or maybe I wanted her to pay attention to me. Right? There's that kind of childish side. It's not all childish though. Glan does have something at stake in this relationship. He says here, at the foot of the steps, I turned around. Edvarda was standing at the window watching me. This is a recurrent thing. When he leaves the house, She's either there watching him, in which case he's usually very excited, or she is not. And then in that case, he feels like he's lost her again. Edvarda was standing at the window watching me. She was holding back the curtain with both hands to see. Her expression was thoughtful. An absurd joy flashes through me, and I quickly put the house behind me. With light feet and dimmed eyes, the gun light as a walking stick in my hand. If I should win her, I would become a good person, I thought. Reaching the forest, I thought again. If I should win her, I would serve her more tirelessly than anyone else. And even if she proved unworthy, if she took it into her head to demand the impossible of me, I would still do all I could, and rejoice that she was mine. I stopped and fell on my knees, and in humility and hope, I brushed my tongue against the blades of grass by the roadside, whereupon I got up again. So we can see in this passage that Glan does attach some real feelings, some real emotion to this relationship, and he feels that if he could get Edvarda to choose him, to if he could win her, as he says, this is going to make him a good person somehow. Though he doesn't, and he even sabotages himself. I think most people who read this would think he could have won her, but he does not do what he needs to do to make that happen. His ego gets in the way. And but this is a lovely moment here. He's saying this, he's realizing this, and at the same time, he's expressing this emotion on a blade of grass. Very Walter Whitman-like. And despite saying this, despite saying that if he won her, he would devote himself to her, right after this, Eva appears, and he takes her, just as he's taken other women who pass by his hut, like a Pan character. While Pan is definitely a guy's story to a certain extent, we're seeing it through Glan's eyes. It's Glan's emotions that seem to take precedence. Edvarda is a strong character as well. I mean, she has her own problems, just like Glan. She also has some moments of insight into their relationship, and you can see that she has something on the line here as well. So one of the many times where they're kind of going back and forth, there's this power struggle. She says to him, she looked out the window toward the far horizon. She stood and looked pensively in front of her, answering me who sat behind her. Nothing, Glan. One cannot help having one's own thoughts sometimes, you know. So this was in response that she was happy to see him after he got better from shooting himself in the foot, which of course he said was an accident, but I think it's implied that the characters, the doctor and Edvarda, do not think that's the case. So she comes, sees him happily, and then she suddenly changes like she always does. Then he asks her, what can I do? How can I change this? So she's saying nothing. Are you dissatisfied now? Remember, some give little, and it's a lot for them. Others give all, and it costs them no great effort. Who then has given the most? You've become melancholy during your illness. How did we get to talk about this anyway? And suddenly she looks at me, her face suffused with joy, and says, get well soon, will ya? Till we meet again. So Edvarda presents an interesting question. Some people, I think like herself, it requires her a lot to give a little. Others, and I think she's saying this is Glan, gives a lot, and it doesn't really cost them any great effort. So who then gives the most? And I think this is, even though this comes at maybe about the middle of the novel, it really kind of defines their relationship between two people, one who can't give a lot of emotion, the other who can, and in that struggle, that desire for wanting kind of an equal distribution of feelings. Keep in mind that Glan shoots himself in the foot because the doctor, who he views as his rival for Edvarda, he's limp, he's lame, and And Glan thinks, well, maybe if I limped as well, maybe that would give me an advantage. So there's this sense of trying to gain an upper hand in a relationship by having the same advantages and disadvantages as the rivals. The main part of this narrative, this first part of the narrative that's narrated by Glan, this ends with Eva's death, again, which seems like an accident, but perhaps, I mean, it was Glan being just dumb doing this, but perhaps Mr. Mac set things up this way. Then, shortly after that, Glan shoots his dog and gives it to Edvarda, his dog Aesop. The novel ends, well, that narrative ends there, and then there's this document appended to this, which I imagine was quite bizarre for its time period, having this complete shift of setting, and many of the characters Glan still carries over, but other than Glan, there really is no continuity here. So this next part, Glan's death, the document from 1861, is short. This is only about 20 pages. It's set in India. It's narrated by this British man who is the one who killed Glan, and it's written to Glan's family, really, to tell them to stop looking for Glan. Again, it revolves around this love triangle. Glan kind of took this man who's not named, took his lover from him, and then provoked him into shooting Glan. Glan shot at him, got close, purposely missed, and again was trying to get him to shoot him. In this document, we probably see the worst behavior from Glan. He is drinking with the locals. This includes mothers and young daughters who he's out partying with. He's drunk most of the time. He's not in a good place here. We could certainly give this a post-colonial reading in how they're depicting, or how Knut Hamsun is depicting India. Very much, it's obvious that Hamsun hadn't gone to India. This is a kind of an imagination of what India was, like just a great hunting grounds for these Europeans, essentially. That's how it's being depicted. It's a bit of a mystery here as to why Glan dies in this way. Part of me feels that, just like in the first narrative, we can't believe everything we get here, that perhaps maybe Glan himself is writing this. He says a few times how he wants to get away, get out of society. Even the end of his narrative, he says, "For I belong to the forest and to solitude." Throughout the Glan's death document, the narrator is talking about how handsome Glan is, and saying, Glan's family stopped looking for him. So it seems to me that there's some implication here that perhaps this is Glan. It sounds a lot like him, and in that case, he's faking his death, so to speak, so he can just stay out in the forest. He's not a man to be living in the city. So to answer Sverre Lingstad's kind of dichotomy at the beginning in the introduction, is Glan a Rousseau of the North, or is he just a tourist, a refugee from the city? I think probably the former. He's not made for this city life, and again, this is partly, I think, what makes this a modernist novel, despite being written in the 1890s. Knut Hamsun was extremely influential on a number of writers. I've already mentioned Singer. Henry Miller also talks often about reading Knut Hamsun. This novel here, Ask the Dust, the title actually comes from Pan, and I didn't know this at the time when I was first reading this, but you read this novel, Ask the Dust by John Fante. It's highly engaging, but it's very much almost a retelling of Pan. But worth reading, an LA version of Pan. Knut Hamsun's Pan, a psychological novel, a deep dive into the divided person, the changeable mind, and an exciting read.